After he died, and while everyone else was running stories about his brilliance and significance, the provocative website Gawker ran this headline. One item excluded by respect for the deceased involved corporate philanthropy. In Apple as Steve Jobs ran it. There wasn't any. This is from the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It feels like Apple has been on the cover of every newspaper and magazine this month. People gush about how much they love their iPod and admire Steve Jobs and his company. Yet very few people ever talk about the fact that Apple is one of the least philanthropic companies in America. Apple's stock soared 26% last month. Why isn't it giving anything back? A response comes from the National Review author Kevin Williamson. The argument here is that the company's social contribution is composed of its innovative products and measured by the company's profits. Jobs was sometimes criticized for not being a philanthropist. Mr. Jobs's contribution to the world is Apple and its products, not some Steve Jobs Memorial Foundation for giving stuff to poor people in exotic lands and making me feel good about myself. Because he already did that, he gave them better computers, better telephones, better music players. In a lot of cases, he gave them better jobs too. Profits are not deductions from the sum of the public good, but the real measure of the social value a firm creates. Those who talk about the horror of putting profits over people make no sense at all. The phrase is without intellectual content.
Well, I define social value as the things that society actually values. When people want to get in the middle of a transaction, when you have a buyer and a seller who want to exchange something, they both find value in that. That's the whole point of having voluntary exchange, is that each party believes for whatever reason that he's coming out better than he was before. And of course that's true in most cases. That's the division of labor. It's how societies get wealthy. So usually when people use terms like social value, what they're actually saying is, I don't like the outcome of that voluntary exchange or of that aggregation of voluntary exchanges in a market. So, I think, I'm a theater critic in one of my many jobs, and I think that people should value the plays of William Shakespeare more than they do the music of Christina Aguilera, but they don't. And it doesn't make sense for me to insert myself in there and say, well, even though you actually value this, you really ought to value something else. At least from an economic point of view and a political point of view, that doesn't make any sense.
The gallery exhibit here in New York City is raising a lot of eyebrows.
They're snapshots of the most intimate and private moments. The pictures were taken by artist Arnie Svensson from his apartment across the street using a telephoto lens. Now the photos are the subject of an exhibit called The Neighbors and are on sale for as much as $8,000 each.
Sure, yeah. If people find value in those things, there are profit opportunities that conflict with other goods, always, of course. So, the question of privacy and in what context you have privacy and what context you don't have privacy. But in terms of exchange, yeah, if people didn't actually value what he was selling, he wouldn't be able to sell them. Yeah, the artist question is a difficult one because you have to get into some very specific things about rules about privacy, but take a different example. I would argue that drugs should be legal, and not just marijuana, but all drugs that people want to take should be legal. So from the point of view of just plain economic analysis, yeah, there's obviously value being created there, that people value these experiences they get from various substances.
The story of Tom's Shoes, along with its founder, is very good. As one commentator asserts, it's so good that even Hollywood would be hard-pressed to produce such a perfect narrative.
Well, I think that the great thing about Tom's is that we make it so easy for people to do something. I think everyone wants to serve, they want to give back, but it's sometimes hard. And so we make it easy. You buy a pair of our shoes, we give a pair on your behalf to a child in need, one for one, and we make it really easy.
Another commentator sees the Tom's Shoes story differently. People keep forgetting, he writes, that Tom's is a for-profit company, and not a charity. The one-for-one campaign is simply a clever marketing tool. I could maybe forgive this if Blake Mycoskie wasn't such a douche. He refers to himself as the CEO of a movement. No. You're the CEO of a massively profitable fashion company. You live in Los Angeles. You own a yacht.
Oh, no, I don't think so at all. So everyone knows what they're getting into in that transaction. They know that Tom Shoes is a for-profit enterprise, that its executives and owners and shareholders are making money from this, and the more successful they are, the better they're going to do, but that they're also doing something that is genuinely good in addition to that. And they are using that good they do as marketing, as we all know, to help them to... so there's no reason I don't think you can do both things at the same time. I mean, profit is still going to be a pretty good proxy for that because people are paying a premium for their products, right? You know, we all know that there are certain companies that treat their employees in certain ways, that act certain ways in the world, that have certain kinds of standards of their own. I mean, there's a reason some people shop at Whole Foods and some people shop at Walmart. And there's a reason some people won't shop at Whole Foods because they don't like their libertarian CEO. You know, there's always more to an exchange than the material assets changing hands. I mean, this is why branding makes sense. This is why, you know, a black suit from Prada costs $3,500, but a black suit from Sears costs $350. Oh, sure, of course, yeah. Well, it's harder to come up with a dollar figure on something like that. I mean, the nice thing about a for-profit enterprise is that you can get down to the penny an estimate of how acutely people actually value its output because they will tell you, and they'll tell you through prices and they'll tell you through profit. Now, if you're talking about a soup kitchen, it's harder to put a dollar amount on that because you're operating outside of market. So there we sort of have to go by gut and intuition and other things. Well, so if you want to look at the value that the value that I create in my work, you know, the value that I create as a journalist and a writer, I think that the money I make is actually a pretty good measure of that. You know, people buy my books because they find value in them, or sometimes maybe they buy them and they don't find value in them, but they don't normally bring them back. But, you know, a publisher will pay me a certain amount of money because they expect, you know, certain things out of it, and people, the end product users, do that. And you could say the same thing about a banker or an insurance salesman or a veterinarian or anything else. Now, if you want to talk about the value that I create as a human being, then you're talking about a wider set of questions. You know, it's what kind of citizen am I? What kind of neighbor am I? What kind of member of my family am I? And I don't know that there's a holistic way to answer that question. So I think if you want to answer it, if you want to talk about it in economic terms, there's a pretty good way to do that. If you want to talk about it in broader terms, then you're going to have to use, well, pretty much by definition, a non-economic metric to get an answer for that. So again, I guess I'd go back to what I started with, is that economics is a really good way to answer economic questions, but not all questions are economic questions.